welcome to our Bible Ponder for this week. We're continuing our look at the Gospel of Luke, and we're looking at chapter 10 today. And if you remember, in the past two episodes, we looked at chapter 9 broken down into two parts, and in it we had a massive shift that takes place in the Gospel of Luke where Jesus turns his face resolutely towards Jerusalem, and you have a sort of shift away from the Galilean ministry where Jesus is up north and he's doing lots of things up there, kind of keeping his distance from the powerful political situation in Jerusalem. And whether he's doing that to fulfill a certain mission or simply to keep himself safe because of his political agitation and making people angry at him, he's stayed up there so far. But now he's heading down to Jerusalem for Passover, and that the last bit of his life in Jerusalem around the Passover time takes up the majority of the narrative in all of the Gospels. The last week of Jesus' life leading up to his death and then resurrection takes up the majority of the text of all of the Gospels. And so that's where we're headed now. And we also have a bit of a tonal shift as well into a bit of eschatology here in chapter 10. I've talked about this a little bit before, but just as a reminder, eschatology, or the idea of looking at the end things, is a sort of cyclical thing for the writers of these books and the thinkers in the ancient world. They didn't see time as one big long thing, but a series of repeat cycles. And so the end of the age, or the end times, was not some far off thing in which all of history was ended, but the idea of an end of one age and the beginning of a new age. And so in a lot of that talk you have, until the end of the age type of things, forever and ever, all of that sort of thing, there is this idea that there are different ages of time. And there was the predominant thought that the Messiah would end one age and begin a new one. And the end of the old age would see the end of a time in which Israel is oppressed, in which they are subjects of a larger kingdom. And the new age would be one in which there is rule again, in which they have been rescued by God, in which God reigns and Israel's king is restored. That's sort of the messianic vision in most instances, kind of a generalized sense. Again, there's different ideas of exactly who the Messiah would be and what they would do. But generally, if there is a strong messianic expectation, it is that the Messiah would see the end of the old age and the beginning of the new age, in which the kingdom of Israel is restored. And so far, Jesus is hitting a lot of these points, but he's hitting them differently. He's brought in the 12 disciples as the 12 tribes of Israel. He's doing a lot of things that show that he is enacting this new age and bringing about this new Israel. In chapter 4, he stands up in his hometown and reads out a bit of the Old Testament about the blind receiving sight and the prisoners being set free and all of that sort of thing, these symbols of a new age. And here we have more of that in chapter 10. He's already sent out the 12, and now he's going to send out 70. And 70 might refer to, again, in this new Israel sense, the 70 sort of elders of Israel, but it could just be a kind of multiple of 12, 70, or 72, depending on the text that you read. But he sends them out, and he gives them sort of similar instructions about not taking bags, not taking sandals, no extra stuff. Go light, go in pairs. If people don't welcome you, then turn your back to them. It's a similar sort of instruction. But there's a lot of eschatological language, that language about symbols of the end of this age, looking to the new Messianic age. And so he sets all of that up. He sends them out. And then he has woes, which is the sort of text he's inserted here, woes to different cities who don't welcome him. Again, it's graphic and it's evocative because it's about symbols of the end of the age. As he's turning his face towards Jerusalem, we're getting these symbols. And then in verse 17, the 70 or 72 return, and they return saying, Lord, in your name, even the demons submit to us. And he says this again, listen for this symbolic language. I watched Satan fall from heaven like a flash of lightning. See, I have given you authority to tread on snakes and scorpions and over all the power of the enemy. and nothing will hurt you. Nevertheless, do not rejoice at this, that the spirits submit to you, but rejoice that your names are written in heaven." So he's saying this is great. These are the symbols of the coming of the age, but that's not what it's about. It's not about you driving out demons or you doing miracles or you being superheroes or any of these things being something about the signs in themselves. That's not what we're looking for. What we're looking for is being part of this kingdom, part of having your name written in heaven, and being welcomed in the people of God. And Jesus is a reminder that these are symbols, but they're not the end goal. And then it goes on, we get some more stuff from Jesus. At the same hour, Jesus rejoiced in the Holy Spirit. And he says, "I thank you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you have hidden these things from the wise and the intelligent and have revealed them to infants. Yes, Father, for such was your gracious will." That kind of talk would have really angered the scribes and the Pharisees, the learned people who were constantly antagonizing Jesus and his disciples, who were, again, fishermen. Not, necessarily dumb people, but not educated, not the sort of scribes or teachers of the law who are the ones who are always pestering Jesus. And then he says, "All things have been handed over to me by my Father, and no one knows who the Son is except the Father, or who the Father is except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son chooses to reveal him." In this language of not only does the Son have this special relationship with the Father, but that the Son reveals the Father to people. And so Jesus, again, saying that his role is to reveal God truly to people. Then turning to his disciples, he said to them privately, "Blessed are the eyes that see what you see. For I tell you that many prophets and kings desired to see what you see, but did not see it, and to hear what you hear, but did not hear it." And this is in reference to all of these eschatological signs and symbols, these things about the end of the age. And if you remember back to the beginning of Luke, one of the early stories of Jesus as a child is he meets two prophets, the man and the woman who are waiting to see the Messiah, and they've been told that they will see him. And so they are two examples of prophets and kings, people who are waiting to see these signs of the end of one age and the beginning of a new one. And it's interesting here that Luke, right after all of these signs and symbols and turning towards Jerusalem, all of this, we get the story of the Good Samaritan put here. And this is interesting for what it says. Normally we pluck this story out and just read it on its own as a sort of moral tale, an ethical tale, an idea of, maybe turning things on their head, and the Levite and all of these people pass by the man, but the Samaritan stops, and what does this tell us? And we dissect it on its own. And there's plenty of that out there. We've done it plenty. We will do it plenty more in plenty more sermons. But what I want to recognize about it here is its placement. In the midst of this sort of signs and wonders sort of look at who Jesus is as the Messiah, that this is placed right here, that in the middle of it, it's almost like a reminder. What is this new kingdom all about? What is this new age all about? This new age that the Messiah is bringing out isn't about a military rule or a conquering kingdom, but in the midst of these eschatological signs and wonders that point towards the end of the age, this story is a reminder of what it actually is that this new age is going to be. An age where things are turned on their heads, and where love is shown by people who aren't part of the same group. And in fact, sometimes those groups are confounded. And I think it's important to reckon with that placement of the story here, not just the content of the parable itself, but really why it's there and for what reason it's put here. And I think it's a reminder of the nature of this kingdom. And I think similarly with the final story, which is where we'll sort of end, is the end of chapter 10. We have, "Now as they went on their way, he entered a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. She had a sister named Mary who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to what he was saying. But Martha was distracted by her many tasks. So she came to him and asked, 'Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her then to help me.' But the Lord answered her, 'Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things, There is need of only one thing. Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken away from her. This is a story that we tell often to talk about the difference between busy work and sitting at Jesus' feet. And we have a Martha and a Mary here. Luke doesn't necessarily link them to any other stories in the Gospels. There's obviously quite a few Marys and a couple of Marthas, and so these could be characters that we've met before. They could just be two other people. They're common enough names. But what we have here is an interesting story. And again, I think we're maybe right to talk about this in terms of, Martha is running around trying to do all of these things and make everything ready. And that can be a noble task. And often we do that in our churches. We run around and we run around and we run around and we do lots of things thinking that that's how we're serving Jesus, by just doing lots of stuff. And sometimes what Jesus calls us to is to sit quietly and just be with him, be in his presence, reflect with him. And that's true. That's often the message of this. And I think that's there. But what I want to look at this is, again, in a different way, and again, in that context of these eschatological signs and how these stories fit into that, is this is another story in which the roles of gender are flipped. So often the women were sitting or were part of the hospitality, and the women stayed where they were and looked after rabbis and teachers as they traveled about. And it was in some ways that way for Jesus, that Jesus had his disciples and they traveled about, but in different places there were women that took care of them. And that was part of the roles as they took them in that day. But Jesus is constantly moving beyond that and calling women beyond that to say, these roles have put you in a box that you don't deserve to be in, and you can have equal status here. And he's raising them up. And this is no different. So what we can glean from this isn't just that Martha is distracted by busy work and Mary is being still, so that difference between busyness and stillness, but looking at it in terms of gendered roles, that Martha is going about doing the typical female gendered role of looking after the housework, of getting food, cleaning up, doing all of these things for the men as they sit. And Mary is taking a place among the men, sitting at Jesus's feet like a disciple. And so maybe part of what Martha is angry about is she's left me, but like, this is my role and that's her role too. She has to get up. You get that she doesn't come up to Jesus and say, hey, tell one of your disciples, tell Peter to get off his bum and come help me in the kitchen. She's calling Mary to come do that. And what Jesus says is, you were worried and distracted. There's need of only one thing. Mary has chosen the better part. Almost inviting Mary to stay and inviting Martha to join her, to say, look, come and sit, come and be a disciple, come and have equal status among us here in this moment. So I think that's another really interesting moment to see how Jesus, in part of these eschatological signs and symbols, the end of one age and the beginning of another, in this new age that he's enacting as Messiah, he is setting up as equal men and women. He is breaking away from these roles that would put people in certain roles and put people in certain boxes. And so I think that aspect of it is brought out when we keep in mind the context there. So we'll move on in a bit next week to look at where Luke places the Lord's Prayer and some talk about prayer. And we'll get to that in a week's time. So thank you for joining us. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And I hope that you have a good evening. Bye-bye.